I recently watched American Primeval, great TV
Oh
show.
yeah, yeah. Let's start with dogs. Yeah.
Yes, and I know that you are big on history of Native Americans. And can you
Mhm.
just tell me your thoughts about that show?
To say that is one of the most violent things ever shown on TV, of course, is not accurate because there are things that are more violent. But it's the most violent in the sense that violence seems to be the number one language that all the characters speak to one another. So it's not violent in the sense that what you see is beyond, like, I don't know, if you watch Spartacus was ultra violent. If you watch Game of Thrones is, but I don't mean the violence as in graphic violence. I mean the violence as having this very gritty feel to it. That is a world in which one wrong eyebrow raised the wrong way gets you a bullet in the head right away. It's intense for sure. Very, very gritty. It's not the kind of thing that you watch to go like, oh, I'm just gonna relax with something tonight. It's very well done. Great writing, great everything, but hell, it's intense.
Historically accurate Hollywood films, I have to say Hollywood films, sometimes they take a creative license, as we can call it, or they call it, and they rewrite history that if you would put in Narnia or Middle Earth, it would make more sense. In Westeros, in Game
I
of
mean,
Thrones.
to
Yeah.
me, it's like if you're looking for accuracy in movies, you're looking in the wrong place. The key word of any, whether it's literature, whether it's movies, is that it's historical fiction. Fiction being the key word. If you want the actual history, watch documentaries, read books, go to the primary sources, the podcast, that like things that advertise themselves as we're doing history, well, that's when you're gonna judge it for accuracy. But things that are fiction, more or less based on history, any expectation of accuracy, I think, is misplaced because it's really not their job to tell history in an accurate format. Some people will be much, much closer to accuracy. Some people will completely become Quentin Tarantino, Hitler was bombed, Paris movie theater kind of thing. It's a director choice. It's not even a requirement because, again, you're not doing history, you're doing fiction. It's always an interesting discussion to see where, if a movie or a series, how accurate or not it is. It's not the metric by which you judge those things because they are not designed to be accurate.
When a film, the power of film, actually overwrite academic history in the public mind. And
Sure.
that's what I want to discuss with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's true. The problem too is the problem of the public, not of the filmmaker, because again, is they are creating something that's for entertainment, the end. If people confuse a fictional representation for history, that's their problem, that they shouldn't. That yes, you should actually read books. You shouldn't assume, oh, I know about this event because I know about Thermopylae because I watched 300. It's like, no, you don't. You saw a cool movie. That was great as a movie. If you want to know the history, read the damn book or listen to a podcast about it if you think the podcaster is credible or watch a documentary. Those are the people who are supposed to do an accurate job. But I think I mean, yeah, of course, people will get whatever impression they get from movies because most people don't read. But again, that's the problem of the people who don't read more than the responsibility of a director whose job is to educate you and be accurate. It's like, that's not their job.
For example, I saw the sequel of 300. I don't know what it's called, 300 sequel. But
Yeah,
I was very annoyed. It's that the main character who fought the naval battle is Miltiades. But in the film,
yeah,
he's some other name. I couldn't enjoy the film because I know the fact.
right.
What is more dangerous in historical inaccuracy or historical indifference?
The job of movies or literature that's fictional, that works with history, is just to fascinate you, just to make you go, wow, like this is a beautiful world that they are describing. I'm interested. I'm interested in what it would have been like to live that much time ago. That's it. Then, if you want to do the job of learning the history, you read about it and you do all that. So, to me, their job is purely to inspire somebody to be curious about history. Like the place where I go hard is people who are supposed to be historians or who are writing history supposedly as history, and they do a god awful job at that, and they are filled with inaccuracy and all of that. Now that's a problem. So I did recently, I did a Substack on a book that became super famous called Empire of the Summer Moon, and it's about the Comanche in the 1800s. And it's not written by a historian, it's written by a writer, a journalist, but the point is it's portrayed as history and it's more fiction than history. I mean, they're wildly inaccurate things reported in what's supposed to be a history book. Now, that to me is a problem because you're telling people this is real stuff, and it's not. If you're telling people this is a movie to entertain you, and sure we'll throw in some history, you're honest about the expectations. I don't have a problem with that. If then, yeah, you want to have Brad Pitt killing Hitler in a Paris theater, that's fine by me. But if you are telling me that this is a history book and this is what really happened, and then you fill it with inaccuracies, well, then that's where there's a problem.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you because I listened to your podcast, Drunken Taoist, when you spoke about it. Why do we forgiving these people these inaccuracies?
Well, that's where we shouldn't be. And I think the only reason why those things pass by and they fly by is because people don't know any better. So whether it's the average read, I mean, the only reason why I notice is because I know a lot about Native American history. If I didn't, I probably wouldn't notice. I would read it, think, oh, it's well written, oh, it's cool, whatever, and go right with it. The only reason why certain things pop up to me is because it's a field about which I know quite a bit about. To me, it's obvious, but it's not even that you have to be uneducated. Bunch of journalists have pushed the book to become a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, despite the fact that it's utter trash from the point of view of historical research. It's good in how it's written, but historical is atrocious. But again, you need to know the history in order to realize, to judge if something is accurate or not. You're not gonna know it. It's in a book, it's well written, it lists some sources, seem credible, must be real. If you don't know any better, then you take it as face value. But that's the place where it shouldn't be forgiven. It's definitely forgiven in fiction because that's what fiction does. Fiction openly tells you this is not reality. And so it's honest. But if something is telling you this is real history and that what they do is not real history, well, that's where we have a problem.
All of my country's history is rewritten by other people. I wrote novel for 16 years, but that research took me 5 years to write 40 pages. And when I start to speak with the people who are Bosnians and told them, hey, do you know this and this happened? No, it didn't. And then I showed them the books and
Yep,
pointed in the right way. And they were like, oh, I didn't know that. Because the history is rewritten so many times that the real
of course.
history is deleted. How does historical fiction then disguise its history blur the line between memory and myth and history, and how does it all come together, and how to stop that?
History is a hard field to begin with because you rely on sources that are often incomplete and you rely on, so, it's even a book by a historian it's straight up history and nothing else. There's nothing fictionalized. There's going to be some guesswork involved because there are some things that are missing, some facts that you're not entirely sure. So, in order to be able to really put together a story, you're going to have to do the best you can being honest, but at the same time, you're going to, if you have, it's like putting together a puzzle, but you're missing half of the pieces. As you put it together, then you're reconstructing what the other half may look like. But of course, you're taking some guesses in the process. And I think a good historian does that, being honest about it, saying, this is what we know. We know A, we know D. We think that for to go to A to D, you need to have gone through B and C. And this is my guess based on the evidence, and this is the actual hard evidence. And that's fair, you know, that's how you should do history. Of course, there's a bunch of people who don't. Of course, there's a
Yeah.
bunch of people who will write stuff that's just plainly inaccurate. And again, if people don't know any better, it's gonna be hard to see where the line is.
My question is why people are so drawn to hidden truth and secret plots.
I think it makes you feel like the smart guy in the room. Like, oh, you guys think you know the stuff, but did you know that this thing is actually what really happened? It's tantalizing, it stimulates your curiosity because it's taking sort of the standard version that your boring high school teacher may tell you, and instead you go like, ha ha, but there's so much more to the story. And you know, in most cases, it's crap. And I think that's also the problem of sources. You know, it's like a YouTube video is probably not a source in the sense that depends who does it. You know, if how good are they as historians? How good are they at working with evidence? How even podcasts, is it a good source? I mean, I've listened to podcasts that some podcasts that people love and I'm listening and I'm like, Jesus Christ, it's so wildly inaccurate. And again, you're like, okay, well, how can you tell the difference between this one guy and that one guy? Neither one is a professional historian, but one guy is working like a dog to actually check the sources like a historian would, and another guy is, you know, approximating wildly on. So, you know, podcasts as sources are somewhat dubious. It depends on who's doing them. YouTube channel, same thing. Books, even that present themselves as history, who's writing them? Are they written by a historian? Are they not? Not that if they are not written by a historian, they're going to be inaccurate. Because again, you can be just a random amateur or a journalist who really does the work, and then you are going to be accurate, much like a historian would, except you probably even write better and make it more appealing. So that's great. But the question is, how good are you with evidence? Because that's what history is based on. It's based on evidence, you know, it's based on, and so depending on how you play with that, you either come up with real history or you're making stuff up.
Conspiracy theories are almost rewriting everything and making this sort of a myth.
I mean,
Uh,
it's the same thing that's happening in politics, in everything else. Like we are living in a period in history where facts don't seem to matter anymore. Evidence, like evaluating evidence is a lost art in the sense that most people, like there's propaganda being repeated in every direction. People are so confused by it all that at some point they decide emotionally to choose one side or another and then stick with it, no matter how little evidence there may be behind whatever claim there are. We live in the times of like, what was it, Trump back a few years ago when he said I could shoot somebody down the street and not lose a vote. That's what it was about, is the idea that facts no longer matter, what evidence no longer matters because people have been overwhelmed with more information that they can process, lacking the ability to separate what's actually good evidence and good information from crap. And so when you're overwhelmed, you sort of give up on like the whole process of evaluating evidence goes out the window.
yeah, but why make us so willing to surrender to individuals, charismatic leaders? Now it doesn't exist. Yugoslavia went through it, and
Yeah.
they chose this Milosevic guy who was charismatic, but then he ruined everything. So why die? Why? Why?
Simple. It's real simple. Is when people are scared and overwhelmed, they will gravitate to somebody who acts like I'm the strong man who's going to fix it all for you guys. Don't worry about it. You don't need to think it that hard. I'll take care of it all. Just get behind me. And, you know, it appeals to that kind of father figure that's reassuring and that promises that will make everything great again. It's crap. It's not real, but it never fails. And that's why dictators are popular. That's why cult leaders are popular if you want to remove it from politics and look at that kind of, because they offer you a sense of security. They offer you a sense of identity. They offer you solid answers. Now, they are not really solid, but they look solid. They make you feel like you have solid answers. And in a situation where you don't feel that anybody has good answer, where it's all chaotic, where you're lost, where you're scared, when there are lots of things changing too quickly for you to process, people desperately want somebody to fit in that niche of the father figure who tell you that they have it all under control. This is a great time if you want to start a cult. It's a great time if you want to be a dictator. Because there's the ground is fertile with fear and confusion, which is the stuff from which dictators and cult leaders gain nutrients.
Personality cults are more
Mhm.
common in times of chaos. Or do they create the chaos themselves?
Both. They start. Nobody's gonna say, I wanna give all my money and my wife and my identity to some random cult leader because their life is working out great. They are doing it because they feel that something major is missing, that their life doesn't make sense, that something is scaring them, it comes from a sense of inadequacy, of insecurity. Otherwise, somebody who's happy, fulfilled, and sure of themselves, they are not gonna go want to follow a cult leader or a dictator. That's not how it works. It's based on weakness that make people go in that direction.
Why don't we make a personality cult about somebody like Caravaggio or Nietzsche or I know you don't like him, but Marcus Aurelius. Why
No,
they
but
are not.
Marcus Aurelius is fine. I think is you need part of being a good cult leader and a good dictator is you need to be good at marketing, because most of it is marketing. And a lot of the people that you may like philosophically, they may be brilliant, but they may not be necessarily great marketers. Um, it's as simple as that. I mean, why is it that today you have a zillion young guys who look up at some clown like Andrew Tate and think that there's something valuable there? Are there no other men who are clearly way better role models? Yeah, of course, a zillion. Like you can go look pretty much anywhere and find better role models. A guy like Tate is good at marketing, gets his name out there, so inevitably he's gonna attract more attention than somebody who may be way smarter, have better answers, but not even their neighbors know him, because doesn't do the job at marketing to attract enough attention.
But why do we.
Like we confuse, sorry, if I can add
Yeah,
one thing,
yeah,
we
yeah, yeah.
confuse sometimes content with like we think that good content is what's going to get you attention. The quality of what you produce is a fraction of the whole thing, maybe 20%, maybe 30 if you're lucky. Most of it has to do with stuff that has nothing to do with quality. And not only there's timing, there's luck, there are other things, but mostly is how you get your name out there, present yourself, have a certain image, do all the algorithm hacking techniques. That goes way further to decide who's going to be successful and who's not than any actual quality in content.
So, in this personality cults, do you think it's more admiration or worship?
I think it starts like for people for whom it's not enough to just, hey, I really like this guy, what he has to say, what he's thinking, whatever, right? Is that doesn't fulfill the void I feel in my life. Is the difference between somebody who enjoys a glass of wine over dinner versus somebody who need to drink 3 bottles of a day. It's one can be that's the admiration side of like, hey, I enjoy it. This is good. The other one is obsessive because you're lacking something and you need this thing to fill this void.
Why we always remember the most violent films, most violent acts in history, most violent stuff in the world instead of
Yeah, I mean,
ah,
I think is conflict is one of the things that attract attention because we all experience it in so much of our lives. And so the more dramatic the conflict is, the more it catches our attention the more we focus on it. And so, of course, violence is one of the most basic forms of conflict that anyone understands. You don't need to be particularly smart to understand how violence works. So it appeals to everybody.
And then, speaking of conflict and this worst aspects of human nature, Caravaggio, criminal who painted, let's call it what it is. I read somewhere, or somebody told me, Caravaggio was a mystic lost in violence. Does Caravaggio's realism bring us closer to the truth of violence, or drag us into this illusion of violence is the key to do great art?
No, I mean, because I think you can have plenty of people who can put something super violent and is not good in any way, shape, or form. Is that he happened to be insanely talented and he also happened to have a very violent character. And his life was very violent, and so he paints what he knows in that way. You know, it's very related to his own life. If you want to extend it beyond just the realm of violence, the idea of the artist that's super intense, who's chaotic and half crazy, and create this beautiful thing but pays a huge price for it. That's to me why Caravaggio is interesting to me as an archetype. And that's when speaking of historical fiction, this is kind of what I'm doing right now because I finished writing the first of two books about Caravaggio that are fiction. And so I'm taking maybe half of Caravaggio's real life, but then I'm giving it an arc that's my Caravaggio, is what I want Caravaggio to say in a fiction way. Because to me, the story of Caravaggio, the problem of the real story, is that it's kind of a depressing story for anybody who's artistic or sensitive or creative. The message of the Caravaggio life is that in order to create these larger than life amazing things, you need to be more crazy than not, self destructive, and end up horribly. Because your artistic sensitivity that gives you that genius is also too tormented, too wild, too crazy to live in day to day life. And so you are going to get destroyed by it. I don't think that's a good message for a couple of reasons. Because one is not necessarily true, it is true in many cases. I mean, you don't have to go far to look at how many musicians died horrendously young, self destructing despite being absolute geniuses. But I think to me, the key element in this story is this is yes, if you are very creative, if you are very artistic, if you are very sensitive, that sensitivity can be a source of all kind of drama, can hurt you a lot, can make your life a mess. That's true. But the key word is can. It's not a sentence. It's not a guarantee. If you learn how to ride that wave, if you learn how to harness that sensitivity, rather than being a curse, it becomes a gigantic gift because you have this ability to feel things in life 10 times more than most people. You're not better or worse, you're more than most people because your range is wider. Now, again, when you are in a chaotic situation, having a wider range is possibly very problematic because you can taste the height of genius and then you end up destroying yourself in the process. But if you learn how to ride it, you have the ability to, swing the pendulum but not get stuck. And then, you find a balance with it. And then to me, that's where it gets interesting is can you be insanely creative and not fall prey to the curse of the Caravaggio archetype of the cursed artist, Can you actually just enjoy life? Can you create incredibly intense, beautiful things and still enjoy life? My answer is very much yes, it's possible. It's not easy. There's 10 zillion role models of fantastic artists who destroy themselves because of they couldn't handle their sensitivity. There are not that many models of people who have done it and managed to find a good life, but there are. Some of those people do exist and those models are there. And so, what I want to do with my fictional stories very much go with the real thing Caravaggio, heavy PTSD, heavy drama, craziness, all of it, but also giving an arc where there's a way out, where it's not It's not this depressing thing like you have to pay the price because of your artistic genius. This almost punitive message that if you reach the height of artistic genius, then you have to collapse into hell because that's the balance. It's like, no, screw that balance. I don't like that balance. I want to learn a balance with sensitivity where you can taste the height without having to collapse miserably.
That brings me to Frankel. He was in concentration camp in Nazi Germany, and he had this optimism about human condition that comes sometimes plainly and bluntly, sometimes between the lines. Somebody who went through similar situation. I wasn't in concentration camp, but I was in the siege. It was profound to read him because I realized when I read him first time that people through history went through the similar situation, and what I took from it is how I deal with it.
Hopefully, not everybody will experience horrendous PTSD, but everybody experience loss and tragedy in their life. For some people, there will be more of it, and then it turns into PTSD. But the point is, it's key to find healthy role models of somebody who can show you a way to go through hell and come out the other way mostly undamaged, or at least maybe with damages, maybe with scars, but scars that have healed. And then you can go on and still have a good life and still be kind to people and still be enjoy things and still because that to me is the ultimate human heroism. You know, anytime we watch a movie about hero this or hero that, to me that's what it's about. It's going through horrendously harsh circumstances and being able to come through and still be good to other humans, enjoy your own life, find ways to, you're not enjoying life because you're superficial and stupid and you don't know how much pain there can be in life. You know all of it, but in the Viktor Frankl model, you find a way beyond it anyway. And to me, they couldn't make enough movies or art or books on this topic because it's rare enough. It's not very common. You know, how much more common is the guy who experienced tremendous PTSD and goes down the drug addiction, alcohol addiction, becoming an absolute monster to the people in his life, going half crazy, going. That's way more common than the alternative, which is why I think it's important to put the accent on the alternative because it can inspire people to think this is possible. This is not a death sentence. I don't have to fall into the depth of all this self-destruction. There is a way out.
You'll have approximately 10 minutes more. I wanted to ask you something. I have this question, and I ask few people, I get interesting answers. Did the Roman Empire fall, or did it just change its clothes? Roman Empire first divided, then Byzantine, then Western Roman Empire, then
Right.
Catholicism and Orthodoxy.
I mean, I guess two things on that. So one about the Roman history, that's an example of fiction of serving a purpose, right? Like when I watch HBO Rome is when I started appreciating Roman history. It has been taught to me all my life and I hated it. And after HBO Rome, which obviously is not accurate in the sense of being exactly all true, it's fiction, but it gave me a feel for it, a texture for the feeling of Roman history, where I was like, okay, now I can read Roman history and be into it. So that's a perfect example. If it doesn't have to be accurate to inspire you to enjoy the history that you didn't enjoy before. Like at what point something changes enough that it's no longer that thing? I mean, on one level, any change, it means you're no longer the same person you were 2 hours ago. Because on every level, biological, the slightest changes are taking place within you. When you talk about something like the Roman Empire, at what point do we decide the changes are too much for it to see any kind of continuity? I mean, even if you think like purely in terms of biology, take somebody who's 100% of one ethnicity, whatever ethnicity you want. They marry somebody who's not. Their kids are 50%. Their grandkids who marry somebody who's not is 25. Go down a few generations and their direct descendants will look nothing like them, right?
Mm.
Are they not their direct descendants? I mean, they are, obviously, But at what point do you assume that there's a continuity in terms of ethnicity? Is it's a constant change is constant. Some moments it happens faster, some moments slower, but it never stops. And I think with the Roman Empire was already completely different beast from the Roman Republic. It's a judgment call to say when you want to decide that the change is too much to actually see continuity there.
So your answer right now reminded me of the ship of Theseus, if you know the story. It was a philosophical paradox. You have a ship, you repaired bits and pieces. By the end, everything is changed. Is it the same ship or it's a new ship? How do you want to be remembered?
And there are many ways to answer that. I think on one level is if I were to decide to go a cynical route, you won't, because pretty much all human memory has a tendency to disappear really fast after a person's lifetime. I think the focus on how will people think about it 300 years from now about me, it's probably more ego driven than not, because more likely than not, they won't.
Mm, yeah, we will all be one day ancient history to somebody. What is art for you?
I don't care a lot about pure aesthetics. I care about stuff that moves me, stuff that has an ability to impact me emotionally in a powerful way that makes me feel happy to be alive. And it can even be a very sad thing, but it still makes you feel certain things that you value. So I value primarily emotional impact of art. A piece of music that, sure, it sounds good, but it doesn't move anything, I can do without. A piece of art that doesn't move anything, a movie that I like to be moved by things.
If you could have a dinner with any characters from history or fictional character, who would it be and why?
I love to tell you something that makes me sound cool and smart because of some intellect, but the reality is that it's about having a dinner with somebody from history and I can pick anybody. I will just desperately be looking for some incredibly hot, preferably sweet women. I don't want to discuss philosophy with Nietzsche. I'm sure it's cool, but I'm gonna enjoy a lot more hanging out with this incredibly hot, sweet woman than I would have in some philosophical conversation with anybody from history.
Thank you for doing this again. Well, actually, we did it almost a year in
Oh,
between. See you next year.
sound
Yes,
like a good plan. Oh,
yes. Thank you, Daniele. Ciao.
thank you.